Hi, my name is Chino Nunez, producer, arranger, timbalero, percussionist. I've been in the business for about 35 plus years, about 35 years. And today I'm going to tell you a little story about my life and how I got into the music business. Um, Basically, I started playing when I was about 8 years old. Uh, I was just telling the story about how my dad brought me two records, and at the time it was plastic, what we call vinyl, here in New York. And it was, the first record was Willie Colon, and if I remember correctly, it was the album was called Breaking Out, or Breaking. It was actually them breaking out of prison, and the one of the songs that I fell in love with was Cheche Cole. And Cheche Cole was, it was one of the major hits for Willie Colon and Hector Lavoe and back in the '60s. The other LP, the other vinyl, was El Gran Combo, and that one I remember. One of the songs was Achilipu. These two records were the ones that actually put me and got me involved in salsa. Because prior to that, I was just into like James Brown, the Jackson Fives, and so forth and so on. That was my kind of music in the '60s. That's what I was into at the time. And then, of course, the salsa came into my life. Basically, my sister brought me a pair of timbales, which I had no clue that they were timbales until later on in my life. That a good friend of mine, and I'll tell you all about that later, clarified what they were. She brought me a pair of timbales. They were cheap, probably at the time I would say $20, maybe is what she paid for them. And in order for me to practice, I had to put them on top of my on top of my bed because they made so much noise. So I had to practice on top of my bed, and then I had a little stereo that literally, if I played even soft, I couldn't hear it. I couldn't hear the music while the record was playing because I would try to play with the record. But I got used to it, and I did what I did, and I would listen to what the drummer was doing in the record, and try to mimic what he was doing. That was basically it. That held on to it for about maybe 2 years. I would say about 10, 11 years old. My father managed to save up some money and move out of the projects, which at the time we lived in the projects in Brooklyn, New York. The area was called Fort Greene. We moved out of there and we moved into an area called Sunset Park, which my father actually bought a house. And I had my own basement and my own room, new house. And that gentleman that I was telling you about before, the one that clarified what the instrument I was playing, when he clarified it to me, he told me what that instrument was. I became his neighbor, and one day he just comes over to my house and he sees all my instruments. I literally have bongos, congas, and timbales, and he told me, he said, "Wow, you got congas, you got bongos, you got timbales." And I said, "Okay, which one's which?" Because I had no clue. I had no clue what they were. And he explained it to me. He showed me basic rhythms on each instrument, because he was a lover of Latin music. And at about that age is when I started really getting seriously involved in what I wanted to be. Because it was that point that at that point I was still a little weary. I wanted to be a baseball player because I've always been into sports, but music was always in my heart. My dad was a lover of music. He wasn't a musician, but he loved music. We always had music in the house for Christmas, Thanksgiving. I mean, anything. A party would, if he sneezed the right way, it's a party day. That's my dad and my mom. My mom loved music. And Sundays was the day that my mom would cook, and for us Puerto Ricanos, pernil is something that you had on Sundays. Well, unfortunately, we were kind of, it's a poor setting. Pernil was a luxury, so to speak, an exquisite gourmet dinner for us when we had the money to do it. But there were many Sundays that my mom would make that pernil and have music all around the house. And that's what I grew up with. My memories of my childhood were incredible. And I have to admit that that's probably one of the biggest lessons in my life. That was actually my education in music. Little did I know then, as you know, when you're a kid, you're saying, "Oh my God, please don't play that song again. You're gonna rip my ears to pieces." That actual song that I was saying, it was kind of boring then, is one of my favorites now. To continue with my story, we lived in Sunset Park for the better part of 27 years, and grew up there, developed there, have friends that are like family to me, like my brothers and sisters, and they helped me and they nurtured my ability to be who I am today. But the music business, getting back to that, you know, it was in that area. At the time, there was what we call, well, what some musicians in the West Coast call garage bands. In New York, we had basement bands, and these basement bands, basically, they were created in basements because that's where we rehearsed. We had no money to go to a studio and rehearse. So a lot of basement bands were around the area in Brooklyn and in the Bronx, where I'm at now. I live in the Bronx now, and in Manhattan, all over New York City, you saw a lot of bands working, you know, rehearsing in basements. And we would travel all over just to go see a band rehearse. So in Brooklyn, Orquesta DJ, which at the time had, I'll tell you, Rafael de Jesus was a mainstream singer of the 80s and 90s. We would go check them out. And the Bronx was Caco rehearsing somewhere in the Bronx or in Manhattan. There were times we would actually stand outside a club to listen to one of the mainstream bands like Larry Harlow at the time, just to listen, to hear for me, to hear the timbalero take a solo or do whatever he was doing, and the band, just to hear the band, how they sounded. These are things that I remember until I broke into the mainstream and started playing with the bands. And I developed skills, you know, being analytical, always listening, always buying the new records. I would save up money just to buy a record, just so I can listen to my favorite percussionists play, such as Tito Puente and Orete Vilato and Nicky Marrero. And it was just a great time for music. I mean, so much happening. Later on, about 12 years old, I started, you know, I broke into the scene, playing bongos, congas, and timbales for many different people. At one point, I played with Johnny Pacheco, I played with Celia, I got in with Adalberto Santiago's group. Locally, I played with several bands locally in my area, which were basically top bands in the area and the local sector. But when I broke into the professional bands, it was just a thing where it was incredible. I actually, when I started playing in the settings where Nicky Marrero was at, or Orete Vilato, even Tito Puente, it was an amazement to me. Never was I intimidated, but at the same time, it was amazing just to be around those individuals, just to see them. And again, another part of my education and my process and what I, as far as developing into music.